Welcome to your own personal deep dive, for today. And
oh, cool.
Yeah, today we're going to be looking at Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini.
Okay.
It's a book all about the hidden forces that shape the choices we make every day. So get ready to kind of, uncover the secrets behind, why we say yes and how to navigate a world that's just saturated with all these persuasive nudges.
It's fascinating how Cialdini pulls back the curtain on these hidden patterns, in our behavior.
Yeah.
These almost automatic responses we have to certain triggers.
Yeah. It's we're not always consciously weighing pros and cons all the time. There's all these underlying mechanisms at play. And one of the first things that really caught my eye in the book was this idea of fixed action patterns.
Okay.
And Cialdini uses this hilarious example of mother turkeys.
Okay.
Who have this ingrained response to the cheep cheep sound of their chicks.
Yeah.
It's
like a pre-programmed tape, a specific cue triggering a predictable response. Researchers even tricked mother turkeys into mothering a stuffed polecat.
What?
Simply by playing the cheep cheep sound.
Oh my gosh, that's so wild.
Yeah.
And what Cialdini is saying is that humans have these tapes too, these automatic reactions to specific triggers.
Precisely.
It's kind of scary.
It is a little bit, yeah.
He illustrates this with a study involving a Xerox machine. And people were way more likely to let someone cut in line if they used the word because, even if the reason given was totally illogical.
Interesting. What would they say?
Because I need to make copies.
Oh, right.
Even though everyone at a Xerox machine is there for the same reason.
Yeah.
It's just this word because can short-circuit our rational thinking.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Have you ever noticed yourself automatically responding to certain phrases?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Or cues? It just really makes you think about all the subtle triggers we encounter every day.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
And these triggers aren't always verbal.
Right.
Think about the expensive equals good heuristic.
Okay.
Cialdini describes how turquoise jewelry sales actually skyrocketed when the price was doubled.
Wait, so people bought more when the price was higher?
Yeah.
That seems so counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it taps into this mental shortcut we often use, associating price with quality.
Right.
Especially when we're not experts in a particular area. So the higher price became a signal of value, even if the product itself hadn't changed.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's a great example of how understanding these principles can make us more conscious consumers.
Totally.
Instead of just blindly following price as an indicator of quality, we can pause and do our research and make more informed decisions.
Absolutely. Awareness is key.
Yeah.
These automatic responses can be helpful. But, as Cialdini points out, they can also be exploited.
Which brings us to Cialdini's 6 key principles of persuasion.
Okay.
And the first one is all about reciprocation.
Okay.
This one really resonated with me.
Yeah.
Cialdini shares the story about a professor who sent Christmas cards to complete strangers.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Just out of the blue.
And what happened?
And a surprising number of those strangers sent cards back.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting.
It just perfectly illustrates the deeply ingrained rule of reciprocity.
Yeah.
That innate feeling of obligation to repay what others have given us. It's such a fundamental part of human interaction.
It is. It is.
Cialdini argues that this rule of reciprocation is a cornerstone of cooperative societies.
Right.
It allows for the exchange of favors, goods, and services.
Yeah.
But as the book points out, this powerful principle can also be used to influence our behavior.
Exactly.
Right.
And Cialdini highlights this with a powerful story from World War I. A German soldier spared an enemy soldier's life simply because he had received a piece of bread from him earlier.
Wow.
Imagine that a simple act of kindness overriding the hostility of a war zone.
It's crazy how powerful that is.
It is.
And Cialdini uses this example to show how even unsolicited gifts can create a sense of indebtedness, increasing the likelihood of compliance.
Yeah.
It makes you think about those free samples or promotional items we encounter all the time.
Oh, yeah. Are they really free?
That's a good question to ask.
Right.
Cialdini would argue that we should be aware of the potential for manipulation.
Yeah.
Especially when a gift feels calculated to elicit a specific response.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about demonizing gift giving.
Right.
But understanding the subtle ways it can influence our behavior.
Exactly.
Right.
Fine.
So it's about being aware.
Yeah.
You're not saying we should reject every act of kindness.
No.
But just understanding the principle of reciprocity can help us navigate those situations where it's being used as a tool of influence.
Precisely.
Okay.
And that leads us to another fascinating technique. Rejection, then retreat.
Okay.
This was a classic.
Okay.
And it's happened to all of us.
Oh, I have a perfect example of this one.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was walking down the street one day, and this Boy Scout approached me selling candy bars.
Yeah.
And he started by asking if I wanted to buy a $5 ticket to some event.
And I'm guessing you politely declined.
Of course, $5 for a raffle ticket from a random kid.
Right.
No way. But then he hit me with, well, how about a $1 candy bar?
Oh.
And I felt obligated to buy it.
Oh, wow.
And looking back, I realized I was expertly manipulated.
Oh, yeah.
Classic rejection, then retreat.
It's a brilliant tactic.
Yeah.
And Cialdini uses a much larger scale example, the Watergate scandal.
Okay.
The infamous break-in plan was actually the third most reasonable option presented by G. Gordon Liddy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So even seasoned politicians like John Mitchell were susceptible to this technique.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Liddy initially proposed an outrageous $1 million plan.
Okay.
Then scaled it back to $500,000.
Wow.
Before finally settling on the bargain $250,000 plan that ultimately led to the Watergate break-in.
It's like this strategic retreat makes the final request seem so much more reasonable by comparison.
Totally.
And that ties back to the concept of reciprocation.
Yes.
It feels like the person is doing you a favor by backing down.
Right.
Even though the whole thing was orchestrated.
Exactly.
Crazy.
The requester appears to be making a concession.
Yeah.
And that creates a sense of responsibility in the recipient to reciprocate by agreeing to the smaller request.
It's so fascinating how these principles can work together to influence our decisions.
Right.
And speaking of influence, this brings us to another weapon of persuasion, commitment and consistency.
Okay.
And you know what? This one's actually connected to my Boy Scout candy bar story.
Oh, I'm intrigued. How so?
Well, I started thinking, did that Scout's rejection tactic intentionally play on the principle of commitment and consistency?
Interesting.
Or was it just an accidental stroke of persuasive genius?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if he instinctively understood how even a small commitment, like declining that initial larger request, could increase the likelihood of a subsequent yes.
Because once we take a stand, even a small one, we feel this internal pressure to remain consistent with that stand, even if it no longer serves us.
Right.
And Cialdini provides some incredible examples of how this principle works.
Yeah.
He talks about how toy companies have brilliantly exploited commitment and consistency to boost post-Christmas sales.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And I actually have a personal anecdote about this one.
I think you do. Yeah.
And it's embarrassing to admit.
Okay.
But I fell for this trick 2 years in a row.
Oh, no.
So every year leading up to Christmas, this particular toy company would run these amazing ads for specific toys. And my son, of course, would be begging for them. I promised him these toys. But then come Christmas morning,
they were sold out everywhere.
Exactly.
The classic.
I was forced to buy other toys of equal value.
Right.
Thinking it was just bad luck, or maybe I was a terrible planner.
Yeah.
But then after Christmas, those same sold-out toys would magically reappear on the shelves.
Oh, no.
And my son, still buzzing from Christmas, would remind me, you promised. You promised.
Oh, God.
So I'd end up buying the toys anyway.
Wow.
Feeling like I had to keep my word.
That's a classic example of how companies can leverage commitment and consistency to drive sales.
It's so brilliant and so devious at the same time.
It really is, yeah.
It makes you realize how powerful even seemingly small commitments can be.
Yeah.
And how we as consumers can be manipulated by these tactics.
It's a great reminder to be mindful of the commitments we make, especially in the heat of the moment. Because once we take a stand, we feel this internal pressure to remain consistent.
Yeah.
Even if it's no longer in our best interest.
Absolutely.
Well, speaking of the heat of the moment, that brings us to another powerful principle of persuasion. Scarcity.
Okay. Have you ever found yourself inexplicably drawn to something?
Oh, yeah.
Simply because it was rare or hard to get?
All the time.
I know I have.
Yeah?
In fact, I once went out of my way to visit
a newly renovated
Mormon temple in Mesa, Arizona.
Okay.
purely because it was temporarily open to non-Mormons.
Oh, wow. So the allure of the exclusive.
Yeah.
It's a perfect illustration of how limited availability can automatically increase something's perceived value and desirability.
It's like this psychological itch we have to scratch.
Totally.
Cialdini even conducted a study where participants rated cookies from a jar
as
more desirable when the jar only had a few cookies left.
Wow. Classic scarcity in action.
Right.
The limited supply triggered a sense of urgency and increased the perceived value of those cookies.
Right.
Even though they were identical to the cookies in the full jar.
It's so weird how our brains work.
It is, yeah.
And he links this principle to something called reactance theory, which explains why we tend to want what we can't have.
Right.
Like the Romeo and Juliet effect.
Oh, yeah.
Attempts to restrict our freedom only increase our desire for that freedom.
Exactly.
Forbidden love, banned books, censored information.
Right.
The harder it is to get, the more we want it.
It's like this inherent rebellious streak we have.
Yeah.
When something is presented as scarce or exclusive, it triggers a sense of urgency.
Right.
And makes us feel like we might miss out if we don't act quickly.
It's amazing how these psychological mechanisms are at play all around us.
It is. It is.
And they bring us to our final two weapons of influence.
Okay.
Which often go hand in hand. Authority and social proof.
Okay.
We'll dive into those fascinating principles after a quick break. Don't go anywhere. Okay, so we're back and ready to jump into those final two principles of persuasion from Cialdini's Influence.
All right.
Authority and social proof. And to kick things off, we're going to talk about an experiment that, to be honest, kind of sent shivers down my spine when I first read about it.
You must be talking about the Milgram experiment.
Exactly.
A truly unsettling look into the power of authority.
For those who haven't heard of it, the Milgram experiment involved participants being instructed to administer electric shocks to another person.
Right.
And the disturbing thing is, despite hearing clear signs of distress from the victim, a surprisingly large number of participants continued to obey the experimenter's commands.
It's a chilling example of how deeply ingrained our tendency is to defer to authority figures.
Right, and what's even more fascinating is that the authority in this case wasn't a particularly imposing figure.
Right.
It was simply someone wearing a lab coat, using a firm tone of voice.
Yeah, it's wild how easily we can be swayed by these seemingly superficial cues.
I mean, it really makes you question how much of our obedience is rooted in genuine respect for authority.
Right.
Versus just blindly following orders.
Well, Cialdini argues that it often comes down to those symbols of authority.
Yeah.
Titles, uniforms, even just a confident demeanor.
Right.
Remember that study where pedestrians were significantly more likely to follow a jaywalker wearing a business suit?
Oh, yeah, that one was crazy.
Compared to one in everyday clothes.
So it's not even about actual expertise or knowledge. Yeah. It's more about those visual cues that trigger our automatic response to obey.
Precisely. And compliance professionals, they know this.
Oh, yeah.
Think about those classic bank examiner scams.
Oh, right.
The con artists often use fake titles, official-looking documents, maybe even a borrowed uniform, all to exploit our inherent trust in authority figures.
It's scary how effective those tactics can be.
It is, yeah.
It's a good reminder that we should be more critical, not just accepting someone's authority at face value, but actually questioning their motives and the validity of their requests.
Exactly. A healthy dose of skepticism can go a long way.
Right.
Cialdini even suggests directly asking yourself, how does this expert stand to benefit from my compliance?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it can help cut through the fog and make a more objective decision.
That's such a good tip.
Yeah.
It's about taking back that power dynamic, not just blindly following, but actually assessing the situation before making a choice.
And speaking of making choices, that leads us to our final weapon of influence. Social proof.
Okay.
This principle highlights how we look to others' actions to guide our own.
Right.
Especially when we're unsure or in unfamiliar situations.
This is where that story of Kitty Genovese comes in, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
One of the most tragic and disturbing examples
it is
of the bystander effect I've ever heard.
For those unfamiliar, Kitty Genovese was murdered outside her apartment building. And despite numerous witnesses, no one intervened.
It's heartbreaking.
It is.
And it just boggles the mind that so many people could witness such a horrific event and not take action.
Yeah.
It makes you question, why didn't anyone help?
Well, Cialdini, drawing on the research of Latani and Darley, explains that when there are multiple witnesses, there's a diffusion of responsibility.
So everyone assumes someone else has already called for help.
Right.
Or will take action.
Exactly.
Wow.
It creates a dangerous phenomenon called pluralistic ignorance.
Okay.
We look to others for cues on how to behave.
Yeah.
But if everyone is equally unsure and looking to each other, then inaction becomes contagious.
So it's almost like having more people around in an emergency situation could actually be detrimental.
Cialdini actually suggests that in an emergency, we might have a better chance of survival if there were fewer bystanders present.
That's a sobering thought.
It is.
But understanding this principle can empower us to overcome it.
Right.
Cialdini gives some very specific advice for anyone finding themselves in an emergency situation.
Yeah, what does he say?
He says we need to be direct and specific.
Oh, okay.
Instead of yelling help to a crowd, single out one person and give them a clear instruction.
Got it.
Like, you in the red jacket, call 911.
Exactly. By eliminating ambiguity and assigning responsibility.
Yeah.
We increase the likelihood of that person taking action.
It's a small tweak in behavior.
Yeah.
But it could potentially save lives.
Totally.
It's incredible how powerful these insights can be.
It is, yeah. And it's important to remember that social proof isn't just about emergencies.
Oh, right.
It influences countless everyday decisions.
Okay.
We look to others for guidance on what to wear, what to buy, how to behave in social situations.
Right.
Think about online reviews.
Oh, yeah.
We're far more likely to choose a product with hundreds of positive reviews, even if we don't personally know any of those reviewers.
It's like we're outsourcing our decision-making to the collective wisdom of the crowd.
And advertisers know this.
Right.
That's why they use testimonials, celebrity endorsements, and those man-on-the-street interviews to create an illusion of popularity and influence our choices.
It's all about playing on our desire to fit in, to follow the crowd.
But as with all these principles, awareness is key.
Right.
Cialdini emphasizes that we should be wary of situations where social proof has been manipulated.
Okay.
He gives the example of nightclubs creating long lines outside.
Oh, right.
Even when there's plenty of room inside.
Right.
Just to project an image of popularity and desirability.
It's a reminder to look beyond the surface, to question what we're being shown, and to think critically about the evidence being presented.
And remember, social proof is often most potent.
Okay.
When it comes from people we perceive as being similar to us.
Oh, interesting.
We're more likely to be influenced by the actions of people we identify with.
Right.
People in our tribes.
Which is why, in some ways, the Jonestown mass suicide is such a tragic and perplexing example of social proof. It's hard to comprehend how over 900 people could be persuaded to take their own lives.
It's a complex event with many contributing factors.
Right.
But Cialdini argues that social proof played a significant role.
Okay.
The followers of Jim Jones had relocated to a remote jungle settlement in Guyana. They're isolated, surrounded by strangers, and increasingly reliant on Jones for guidance and reassurance.
So that isolation and uncertainty created a breeding ground for social proof to take hold.
Exactly. When faced with the terrifying prospect of mass suicide, many people look to those around them for cues on how to behave.
Wow.
And tragically, as more people began to comply, it created a snowball effect.
Right.
Further reinforcing the idea that this was the correct course of action.
That's crazy.
It's a chilling example of how social proof, when distorted and manipulated, can lead to devastating consequences.
Absolutely.
It underscores the importance of critical thinking and questioning the information we're given, even when it comes from sources we trust or from people we perceive as being like us.
It's a sobering reminder that even with the best of intentions, these principles of persuasion can be used for good or evil.
For sure.
And that brings us to the end of our exploration of Cialdini's 6 principles.
But before we wrap up, I think it would be beneficial to discuss how we can defend against these powerful tools of persuasion.
Okay.
After all, it's one thing to understand how they work.
Right.
But it's another thing to be able to resist them when they're being used against us.
It's like we've unlocked all these secrets of persuasion.
Yeah.
But now we need to learn how to protect ourselves. It's like we've been given the Jedi mind trick, but now we need to learn how to deflect it. So how do we arm ourselves against these persuasive forces? It feels like we've uncovered all the secrets of the Jedi mind trick, but now we need to figure out how to resist, you know?
Yeah. Luckily, Cialdini gives us some practical strategies for resisting unwanted influence. It's about recognizing those tactics when they're being used and consciously choosing how we respond.
Okay, so let's break it down. Let's start with reciprocity. What are some ways we can defend against it when we sense it's being used as a manipulation tactic? Like I'm picturing myself like a warrior, like deflecting arrows of obligation.
Well, the first step is recognizing when a gift is truly a gift and when it's a tactic disguised as generosity.
Like those free gifts that come with a magazine subscription.
Exactly. Or timeshare presentation or, those offers that feel a little too good to be true.
Right.
If you accept a gift knowing it's part of a sales strategy, mentally reframe it. See it as what it is, a marketing tool, not a genuine favor. That can help neutralize that feeling of obligation to reciprocate.
So it's about being aware of the intention behind the gift, right. But what about those situations where you've already accepted something and then you realize you're being pressured?
Well, in those situations, Cialdini suggests a simple but powerful strategy. Redefine the gift mentally. See it as what it truly is, a compliance tool. By recognizing it for what it is, that rule of reciprocity no longer applies with the same force.
That's a great point. It's like taking back control of the situation, recognizing that you're not indebted. You've simply been presented with a sales tactic.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. So how about commitment and consistency?
When it comes to defending against commitment and consistency, the key is to listen to that feeling in your gut.
You mean that little voice that's like, wait a minute, something doesn't feel right here.
Exactly. Cialdini calls them stomach signs. And if you feel trapped or pressured by a commitment you've made, don't be afraid to voice that discomfort.
It's about acknowledging that you've changed your mind. Or that the situation isn't what you initially thought it was.
Precisely. Don't let that fear of appearing inconsistent override your better judgment. Remember, as Emerson said, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about scarcity? How do we resist the allure of those limited time offers or going fast sales? Those can be really tempting.
It starts with recognizing that emotional arousal you feel when you encounter scarcity. That sense of urgency, that fear of missing out, sometimes even panic.
It's like when you see a concert ticket countdown clock ticking away.
Exactly. So when you feel that rush of emotion, take a step back, take a breath, and remind yourself that scarcity often creates an illusion of value.
So just because something is rare or hard to get doesn't necessarily mean it's actually better or that we need it.
Exactly. Ask yourself, why do I want this? Is it for its function, or am I just caught up in the idea of owning something scarce? If it's the latter, be wary.
That's a great way to reframe the situation. It's about separating that emotional desire from a genuine need.
Okay, and then how about those final two? Authority and social proof. Like, how do we deal with those?
Well, with those two, your best defenses are informed skepticism and independent thinking.
Okay.
Question authority, and don't just blindly follow the crowd.
It's like that old saying, if everyone else jumped off a bridge, would you? Exactly. We need to engage our critical thinking skills, evaluate the evidence, consider different perspectives, and make decisions based on logic and reasoning, not just blind trust or conformity.
So it all comes back to awareness, critical thinking, and trusting our instincts.
Absolutely. Cialdini's work isn't about making us paranoid or distrustful of everyone. It's about empowering us to recognize these persuasive tactics, make informed choices, and resist manipulation.
It's like being given a map, to navigate the complex world of persuasion. We can now identify those traps, those mental shortcuts, those subtle nudges, and make decisions that are truly aligned with our own values and goals.
Well said. And with that, we've reached the end of our deep dive into influence, the psychology of persuasion.
It's been a wild ride.
It has.
Hopefully you've learned some new things, that will help you become a more discerning consumer, a more effective communicator, and just a more conscious decision maker in all aspects of your life.
For sure.
So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay vigilant.